Hey, welcome back to Well, That's Interesting. I'd like to know exactly how both of these things work edition. Today is episode 206, How Undertaker Bees Know When to Remove Their Dead, and some of our most important genes came from 500 million-year-old sea creatures. My friends, we must once again talk about our teeny, life-giving buddies, the honeybee. Now, if you had to listen just about a month ago to episode 203, then you know when I say life-giving, I'm referring to more than just pollination and our food supply. No. That stuff is old news. It turns out, thanks to the honeybee's extraordinary sense of smell, a sense that's hidden in specialized odor receptors in their antenna, they are able to accurately detect lung cancer in humans 93% of the time. And they can do this by having a whiff of our breath. That's right, a single breath. And not only can they detect the presence of lung cancer with such precision, they can also detect the type of lung cancer with like 82% accuracy. Again, from a single breath. Well, today, in the first half of the show, we're going to take the honeybee's sense of smell to a whole new level. And to do that, I need to set the stage. Inside a honeybee hive, well, it's no place for the faint of heart. Wild honeybee colonies can have between 20 and 80,000 bees, with the queen laying 2,000 to 3,000 eggs per day, all while pumping out pheromones to coordinate the chaos. Thousands of foragers come and go, crawling over one another, waggling their bodies and furiously pumping their wings to provide coordinates to flowers in the distance. Nurses care for the hundreds and hundreds of larvae by feeding them, cleaning them, and hundreds more soldiers, well, they're making their rounds. And all of this is done in pitch blackness. So, communication is done through touch, sound, and of course, scent. The hive is like every Sephora that's ever existed and every Sephora that's ever going to exist in one spot. There's a lot of scents happening, is what I mean. And somewhere inside, in the mix, is a dead body. In fact, there's probably a few of them. The lifespan of a honeybee is short, 30 days in springtime. Well, that is if you're lucky enough to survive predation, pesticides, and pestilence. If you are lucky enough to die in the hive, someone needs to find you in all of this, and then they have to remove you. So how do they do it? Now, I can see your face from here. You're like, come on, Jill. Dead things eventually smell like decay. So that's easy, right? Well, that is true, but hold on to your vibrating cheeks. What's called Undertaker bees can find a deceased nestmate in less than 30 minutes. Less than 30 minutes in complete darkness, surrounded by everything I just described. We will get into the ingenious, groundbreaking study which revealed how in the holy hell these undertakers find their nestmates so quickly, and the results will leave you astonished. The connection between each bee is more sensitive than we could have ever imagined. Then after the break, it'll be my honor to introduce you to your most important relatives. More than 500 million years ago, headless creatures that resembled leaves, teardrops, and coils of rope, they propagated our ocean floors. They looked nothing like us on the outside, but that's no problem, because it was what they had on the inside that changed the course of the world. It was these animals who carried the revolutionary genes that code for body symmetry, sensory organs, and immune systems. Genes that are still around today, inside every one of us. We will get into the remarkable, painstaking study that looked over 500 million year old fossils, and the results show how far back we actually go. No wonder we're tired. Hi, I'm Jill Chacha, and if this is your first time listening, welcome to the flock, my bipedal business goose. To begin, we're going to warm up the old time machine and dial it back just a smidge to April 25th of this year. And that's because, my friends, this was the glorious day you were listening to episode 186, when Taurus stopped feeding macaques, they started using stone tools, and older sister bees teach younger bees how to dance. And if you didn't, don't worry, no problem. Just borrow the time machine and go back to April 25th to have a listen. When you're done, come on back to the day you're listening to this episode and then hop back in the time machine with us to go back there. It'll work, trust me. Anyway, what I mean to say is that we're all looking at ourselves having the goddamn time of our lives, listening to one of the best podcasts ever made. And I gotta say, you look great. We're getting to the part where you learned that honeybees, like a lot of other social insects, exhibit temporal polytheism, which is basically just a fancy way of saying that they perform certain tasks at certain ages. In episode 186, I brought up how a bee's first job is babysitter, or technically a nurse, where she takes care of all her younger larval sisters. Then, throughout her 30-ish day lifespan, as she grows, a bee will have the opportunity to graduate into positions that eventually lead her outside the nest. Roles such as the fantastically named trash bee. Then onto guard bee, and then finally onto the coveted mature role of forager bee. Now, that resume was a little rushed, and I just so happened to have skipped over a role that's been something of a mystery to researchers. But thanks to a recent study, we now know so much more than we ever did. My fully grown business goose, it's time to scuttle back into our time machine and return to episode 206 today, where I tell you about the Undertaker role. Yeah, but like humans, not everyone becomes an Undertaker at some point in their lives. According to Cornell University's Gene Robinson, who had the goddamn time of his life watching bees, Gene conducted a number of observational studies on a number of hives several decades ago. They noticed that at any given time, only 1 to 2% of bees in a colony acted as undertakers. And those that did the role, they only did it for a few days before moving on to the forager role. As to why, well, right now we can only speculate. It's possible the role is influenced by a number of outside factors like the colony's need for undertakers, or the egg-laying rate of the queen, and the number of other bees performing this role. What we do know is that, coincidentally, bees performing as undertaker are those who hit middle age, somewhere around 3 weeks after hatching. Now, is this some sad existential crisis? Well, according to Kirk Vischer, another Cornell researcher hot for bees, probably not. Turns out, it's a role these particular bees are damn good at doing. Back in the early 1980s, Kirk was like, step aside, Gene. Fuck, I'm in a field called necrophoresis, or the removal of the dead in a honeybee hive, and check this out. I, too, was having the goddamn time of my life watching bees, and I saw that undertaking happened up to 70 times faster than debris removal. That's right. And when I dipped dead bees in wax, or when I washed them in a solvent, they were removed way more slowly. Yes, I washed dead bees. Don't look at me that way. It was worth it. I think chemical cues appear immediately after death, and that helps to identify a corpse. So suck it, Gene. End scene. Yeah. Thank you for applaud. Thank you for the applause. It's not necessary, but thank you. I'm pretty sure that's like how it all went down. Anyway, my chill, business goose. This is where major studies on undertaking in bees pretty much came to a halt, with a mere hypothesis that some chemical cue is behind it all. Put a pin in that. In the meantime, since the 1980s, there has been a bonanza of additional studies on our fuzzy amigos, including the discovery of cuticular hydrocarbons, or CHCs for short. Now, what the fuck is a CHC? I'm so glad you asked. As so wonderfully summed up by Ava Frederick of science.org, quote, ants, bees, and other insects are covered in compounds called cuticular hydrocarbons, which compose part of the waxy coating on their cuticles, the shiny parts of their exoskeleton, and prevent them from drying out. While the insects are alive, these molecules are continually released into the air and are used to recognize fellow hive members, end quote. So, CHCs give a bee its beautiful sheen, but they are also used for communication. CHCs are basically a long-ass chain of hydrocarbons with more than 20 carbon molecules and way, way, way more hydrogen molecules, and they can be arranged in a number of ways depending on what needs to be said. With all this being said, please join me, will you, at the Chinese Academy of Sciences Shihuangbana Tropical Botanical Garden, and I nailed that. It's here, where ecologist Wen Ping had something of a eureka moment for the fucking ages. Wen had a thought that when a bee dies, its body temperature naturally drops, so their cuticles no longer heat up and emit those CHCs into the air. My friends, Wen hypothesized that it's not that dead bees smell deceased, it's that they don't smell alive anymore. And I'm going to say that again. It's not that they smell deceased, it's that they don't smell alive anymore. Did that not just blow your mind? Wen believed bees go totally silent, and that was the cue. So, how do you even go about testing something like this? Well, let's start with the easy step. First, you got to get some bees. So Wen reached out to the Southwest Biodiversity Research Center in Kunming, Yunnan, and scored himself 5 Asian honeybee hives. And then came the uncomfortable part. He had to prove that live bees and unsubscribed bees emit vastly different levels of CHCs. So if any business geese out there don't want to hear about how some bees were unalived, feel free to skip ahead about 15 seconds. Okay, go ahead. And now for the rest of us, according to Wen's study, simply called Death Recognition by Undertaker Bees, quote, foragers collected in front of the hive were killed by freezing at negative 40 degrees centigrade for 10 minutes. These fresh dead bees were then dissected into different parts, including the rectum, the sting apparatus, the tergal glands, the head, the thorax, and the remaining abdominal cuticle, end quote. Okay, that was a lot, but necessary. Wen was able to identify that the temperature of each section of these heroic bees, Wen was able to identify the temperature of each section of these heroic bees, and by using gas chromatography, he was able to decipher that, if any of those CHCs were being released. So, what did he find? In comparing the CHCs of the very dead bees against those of the very alive bees? Drumroll, please. Thank you in the back. My friends, head on over to our social media stuffs and tap on today's post. You're going to see a graph that is a very handy-dandy visual when it comes to understanding the results. I'll give you a sec. Excellent. I've got it up here myself, and I have to say, at first, it looks like an EKG reading with like a red line and a blue line, but no, it is not an EKG. That red line shows the peaks and valleys of CHCs being released by the live bees. And that blue line there, those belong to the CHCs of the deceased bees. And I'm no ecologist or nothing, but I can count, kinda. And the blue line has only one peak compared to the 8 significant peaks produced by the live bees. So it's 8-1. So there you have it. My lively business goose, when just proved that the cooler dead bees were indeed emitting far fewer volatile CHCs than living bees. Now, he just has to prove that it's these lacking CHCs that alert the Undertakers. So let's get into the next part of this ingenious experiment. Quote, when Ping placed regular, cool, dead bees in a hive, workers always removed them within a half an hour. However, when he placed the bee in a heated petri dish and warmed it up by a few degrees, it often took Undertakers several hours to even notice the body. That's presumably because the warm bee body was releasing close to the same amount of CHCs as a living bee. End quote from Ava Frederick of science.org. Uh-oh. I can see your face from here. I think you're thinking, wait a minute. You said presumably, and maybe it's actually the body temperature that's the telltale sign of death, and not the CHCs. I mean, the deceased bees were taken away when they were cold, and here they are being taken away hours after being warmed up. Well, that is a great point. My sleuthy business goose, you are not alone. Wen wanted to make sure that body temperature was taken into account, and they also wanted to see if it had a significant place in the undertaking process. So, get this. He pulled a Kirk Vischer. That's right. Wen washed the CHCs off dead bees with a liquid called hexane, which can dissolve waxes and oils. So it was completely CHC-free, and then he warmed those bees, those deceased bees, to a temperature of a live bee, and then he put them back in the hive. And then Wen waited. My friends, get this. The warm dead bees, lacking any CHCs, were removed 90% of the time, and they were removed within 30 minutes. So, I guess you can say that CHCs are like the proverbial heartbeat for an Asian honeybee. And as for the Western honeybee or the European honeybee over here in the United States, well, a similar study has yet to be done, but it's believed something similar probably occurs with them. But here's something funny. Yehuda Ben Shahar, an entomologist at Washington University in St. Louis, Yehuda was like, yo, I have an interesting point to make. And they were like, Ava, come over here from science.org. I have something to say. Quote, I think this study is a good start. It does make sense that there is some chemical signature of a dead bee, but I wouldn't say that we know exactly what is going on. For example, although bees can smell with their antenna, they can also taste with their feet, which might add yet another layer to the way they perceive dead comrades. End quote. So, I've been doing this a long time, and I know it's coming. There might be a study on how dead bees taste to their fellow live bees. And I'm going to have to cover that. And I've covered weirder things, but damn, that's a good one. After the break, we're leaving the seemingly alien world of a bee for the truly alien time period on Earth known as oh God, I've said this 100 times in practice, but the Ediacaran era Yeah, Edie Akron. Anyway, we're going to have to start charging up the old time machine again because we need the extra juice. We're going to be heading well over 500 million years into the past to meet some relatives. So bring a casserole and brace yourself. Stay tuned.
This episode is brought to you by Coffee Mate. Coffee Mate is the world's biggest coffee lover because we love all the ways you enjoy. Wait. Coffee Mate can't love coffee more than me. I'm a foodie. I went to Kyoto just for a nitro matcha latte. What? Oh, I have to finish the ad. Coffee Mate, for the love of coffee.
Your teen requested a ride, but this time not from you. It's through their Uber teen account. You drive your teenager around, a lot, to their friend Jacob's house, their other friend Jake's house, to James's, to Jaden's, to Jalen's, to...
Mom? This is Jake's house, not Jacob's.
Now with an Uber teen account, your teen can request a ride under your supervision. They'll ride with a highly rated driver, and with live trip tracking, you'll follow along the whole ride to their friends' houses that all sound the same. Add your teen to your Uber account today. See app for details.
Bye, Mom.
And we're back. We are so back. And my friends, it looks as though our time machine has fully charged, so I'm going to ask you to scooch on next to me and buckle up. Because we're heading way the fuck back to the Edie Akron era, a time period on Earth that spanned a wee 96 million years. Now, if you've never heard of it though, I don't blame you. It was a long, long time ago. Brace yourself. We are 635 million to 538 million years back, and the world as we know it is completely unrecognizable. And I hate to say this. I really hate to say this, but we're going to have to dive to the ocean floor. Yes, and that's because this is where the party is happening when it comes to finding complex life. Now, if you're worried about sharks, please don't be. They're not here yet. We are so far back, even jellyfish have yet to fully evolve into the deadly, dangly things we know of, so we're good in that department too. The creatures I want to show you have no heads, legs, or arms, but the genes they carry are why we are what we are today. Quote, none of them had heads or skeletons. Many of them probably looked like three-dimensional bath mats on the sea floor, or round discs that stuck up, said Mary Drosser, a geology professor at the University of California, Riverside, to UCR News. These animals are so weird and so different, it's difficult to assign them to a modern category of living organisms just by looking at them. And it's not like we can extract their DNA. We can't. End quote. My friends, please put a pin in that need for categorization and then open up today's post on our social media stuffs. What you're going to find is an artist's rendering of what these creatures look like, and then a photo of an actual fossil of one of them. If you swipe past this, you're going to see a few additional drawings of the animals I'm about to introduce, which all have delightful as fuck names. Get this. Let's start with Dickinsonia, whose oval body was segmented with a series of raised bands on their surface. That's the fossil you're looking at, and I think this is the one that Mary was referring to when she said it looked like a three-dimensional bath mat. Honestly, it's an excellent description. I think she nailed it. Then there is the wonderful Kimberella. That's right, Kimberella, who was a teardrop-shaped creature, and that's just the beginning. It had one broad, bulbous rear end and one narrow end that likely vacuumed the seafloor in search of food with something called a proboscis, which I had to look up, and Merriam-Webster defines that as, quote, an extensible tubular sucking organ. And at that point, I felt like this detail should have been private, but we're moving on. And now that you're imagining that, you could also add this to its description. They moved around using a muscular foot like snails do today. So that thing is fucking wild. The little things you see attached to the seabed in the artist's rendering, those completely immobile, pinwheel-shaped friends of ours, well, those are called the this is a good one, Tribachidium. Hello. And finally, my favorite, and soon to be your favorite too. This is the Icaria. It's itty-bitty. This itty-bitty cutie, the size of a grain of rice, was discovered by Mary Drosser herself, along with a team that included UCR doctoral graduate Scott Evans and my friends. This fucking hero. This hero was one of the first bilaterans, animals that developed a front end and a back end with openings at either end connected by a gut. Yes, you know what that means. Thanks to these creatures, we have holes, and very important holes. That's right, you should clap. I want to hear a round of applause, everybody. Yes. You are so right to clap. Evans told UCR News that it's likely that Icaria had mouths, and they crawled through organic matter, quote, eating as they went, end quote. Do you not feel the connection? Yeah. Okay, anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself. My hold business goose. It wasn't until the past few years that these beauties and about 40 other species from the Ediacaran era were rightfully identified as animals. They look so much like leaves that scientists debated for decades whether these creatures were actually in fact animals. And now the consensus is yes, they are. The next step, however, was to figure out where they fit on the tree of life and what influences they had on species that came after them. Spoiler, a shit ton. Let's get into it. Because no DNA from the Ediacaran era exists, Mary Scott and Douglas Irwin, a research biologist at the National Museum of Natural History in Washington, D.C., they decided to solve this puzzle by painstakingly analyzing the fossils of the 4 beautiful, noble creatures we just talked about. And we need to talk about what they found. So what did they find? Drumroll, please. Thank you in the far back. Let's start with something you may have noticed when looking at Dickinsonia. It's symmetrical. In fact, 3 of these 4 animals were symmetrical from left to right, and they had segmented bodies. Now, why is this important, you may be asking? And that is such a great question. Scott told Live Science, quote, developmental biologists have learned that everything with a front and a back, or a left and a right, is using the same genetic elements to establish a front and a back, or a left and a right. We can use that fact to say that if these animals have these same characteristics, then they are probably controlled by the same genes, end quote. So my symmetrical business goose, the genes he's talking about are regulatory genes. For example, you, me, your dog, and most modern animals have genes that encode for eyes and limbs. We also have a set of regulatory genes that tells the body where those things should go. Quote, regulatory genes dictate which body segments become heads and which become feet. Dickinsonia's symmetrical body with raised ridges extending from the midline suggests that the genetic scaffolding for a complex body was already in place, even if all those body segments were functionally the same. This is the same genetic scaffolding found in all animals with symmetrical bodies today, end quote, from Cameron Duke of LiveScience.com. That is one hell of an evolutionary leap, my friends. And it gets better. There is evidence that they were able to repair themselves through a process known as apoptosis. Nailed it. Which is a fancy way of saying programmed cell death, which is controlled by genes that play an integral part in the immune system. And that that dangly thing in front of Kimberella, that's really none of your business, and is thought to find food? Well, that goddamn thing suggests these animals carry genes that could build nervous systems and sensory organs, because how else could they detect and collect food from the seafloor? My friends, these animals were a step or two above sea sponges, but goddamn, what steps they were. The team isn't done poking around the animals of the... Oh man, why is this so hard to say? They're not done poking around the animals of the Ediacaran era. They told UCR News that they plan to, quote, investigate muscle development and functional studies to help further understand early animal evolution, end quote. Oh, well, Godspeed. That's going to be a lot. And I cannot wait to see what they find. The fact that we're all related to a bath mat is... I kind of see it. I do. In the meantime, my exquisite business goose, and I mean that, my exquisite business goose, if you're having any negative thoughts about yourself, just remember that you're over 500 million years in the making. And that's pretty fucking cool. And thank you for listening, rating, subscribing, telling your friends about how fucking cool bees are, and just keep bringing it up until they force you to stop. And then tell them, well, you're just a bath mat, and they'll be like, what? And get into a huge fight, and then explain it. And they'll be like, oh, okay, I see. And in a curious, whole-sized thanks to the folks over at Airwave Media, the podcast network to which WTI belongs. If you love this show, and you do, you love the other podcasts in this family, and please, stay interesting.